Hi everyone, we'll talk about communication disorders today, and let's again define communication disorder. You know, we start all of our slides with the definition of the specific disorder. Actually, a communication disorder is an impairment in the ability to receive, send, process, comprehend concepts or verbal, non-verbal or graphic symbols, and it's any disorder that affects an individual's ability to comprehend, detect or apply language and speech to engage in discourse effectively with others. Now, firstly, you should think that when we are talking about communication, it's a two-way process, right? One-to-one. And communication involves language and speech, and in order to communicate with someone, you should be able to understand what is coming from the other person, and afterwards you will conceptualize it, and afterwards you will express it out. Okay, at the basis of communication, these steps are valid. So when we are talking about any communication disorder, you should think that there is some delay in these steps. But mostly, we meet with communication disorders in the form of speech disorders in school settings. We will do the discriminations later, but know about these basically. And the delays and disorders can range from simple sound substitution to the inability to understand or use one's native language. Okay, I think you get the basis. And also, as I said before, language and speech is involved, but in order to comprehend something, also you should be able to be successful in the process of hearing, right? So it is also important. It may vary, it may range in severity from mild to profound. It is developmental or acquired later, and it may display some combination of communication disorders, and it may result in a primary disability or it may be secondary to other disabilities. Think that a child with an autism also may display some communication disorders, as you may guess as well, okay? And briefly, let's go with the causes of communication disorders. I think you didn't get surprised that we don't have very much strict knowledge on the causes of communication disorders. Actually, if you have followed almost all of my presentations, maybe you caught the point that actually we don't have a clear-cut information on the causes of disorders and disabilities generally. But of course there are some assumptions that can be related to the cause. And for communication disorders, we don't know the reasons, we don't know the causes exactly, but we know that communication disorder include hearing loss, some neurological disorder, some brain injury, intellectual disability, may be related to drug abuse, and there may be some physical impairments such as cleft lips, damar yapışması, or palate. So these may be related to communication disorders. Basically, there are some types of communication disorders, and as I said before, the most frequent one we observe, especially at school settings, is speech disorder. And this is an impairment of the articulation of speech sounds, frequency, and voice. Okay? And for speech disorders, you will observe that a child tends to speak like rolling his tongue around, okay, and they may not say all of the letters and sounds correctly. You can take it, you can observe it. And the second one is language disorder. It's an impairment in comprehension and use of spoken written or other symbol system. And here, why that red? Why are the rabbits red? Okay, you will catch it. There will be an impairment in the use of the language, especially the native language, as you can guess. The third type is hearing disorder, which will lead to communication disorder. It's the result of impaired auditory sensitivity of the physiological auditory system. But of course, if you are not able to hear enough to communicate with a person, you will have a communication problem. Okay, as a result of hearing disorder, you can either be deaf or you can have some hardness of hearing. And here is a short video, so you can watch it, I guess. And we have some signs and symptoms of social communication disorder. We see that the people with some social communication disorder do not speak at all. They have limited word choice for his or her age. And here you may guess that maybe some intellectual disability may accompany this communication disorder. They may have some trouble grasping simple directions or naming objects, like saying table, or if I want someone to go to another room, take a pencil from there and to bring it back to me, they may have difficulty. But of course, here you should be careful that is there any mental retardation accompanying this, okay? And they may have trouble for nonverbal communication, like eye contact, facial expression, bodily language. If we were in the class together face to face, I would ask you which disorder these eye contact, facial expression and bodily language stuff make you remember. You would probably answer it autism. Okay, so mostly communication disorders and autistic spectrum disorders are mixed with each other as well. Okay, people are confused about it. Okay, and we know that to continue with the signs and symptoms of communication disorders, these people have some delays in reaching language milestones. They don't give background information when speaking to an unfamiliar person. They may not understand any riddles or sarcasm, and they may have some problems with understanding nonverbal communication, such as facial expressions. Oops, sorry. And for diagnosis, it's not easy. Okay, there is criteria for communication disorders determined in DSM-5, and afterwards it was decided that communication disorder diagnosis was needed to ensure that the unique needs of affected individuals are met. You already know about these, okay? We should first diagnose so the person will be utilizing from any services to develop him or herself to his or her full potential, right? So in the DSM-5 in December 2012, they have defined communication disorders diagnostic criteria as deficits in using communication for social purposes, impairment of the ability to change communication to catch and match the context, and they have difficulties following rules for conversation and storytelling, and they have difficulties understanding what is not explicitly stated. Okay, so you actually see that there are some similarities of communication disorders with other types of disorders. For example, difficulties following the rules for conversation. Firstly, maybe impulsivity, part of ADHD may come to your mind, remember that they were not very successful at following any rules, and also in the rules of conversation, right? It may resemble it. But also, communication disorders are confused with autism spectrum disorders, since at both of their bases there is this social interaction, eye contact, reading the facial expressions, comprehending, and in an harmony answering, responding it. So you should be a good observer. If you are working at a school setting or a private setting, etc. You shouldn't mix them. Okay, parents' role in communication disorders. And most parents are asking, what is my role in my child's therapy? So, many parents expected that the speech-language pathologist would be the one carrying out the therapy directly with their child. Okay, now you probably heard of speech therapists. Okay, if the only problem is speech, then or if the child or the person is experiencing some problems with the articulation of sounds, then you will get support from a speech therapist, konuşma terapisti. So here the speech therapist works one-to-one with the child. For example, one of the techniques is for a child who is not able to articulate the sounds is to put the pen or pencil here, and he is asked to spell the sounds with the pen. Okay, in order to do roll-up studies. Okay. So this is one-to-one work, but of course parents have some roles here to practice all of these things at home with their child, etc. While parents were willing to be involved in therapy, they were uncertain about what would be expected of them. So some parents felt anxious about their involvement. So if you are working with a child with a communication disorder, actually you already know it from pre-referral and response to intervention teams and individualized family service plans. You should inform the parents about the process, and they should be knowledgeable about what is going to be done with their child by a professional and what they are going to do at home with their child. Okay. So all of these instructions should be clear while working with them. And for treatment, there are three main goals for treating communication disorders. First one is developing coping strategies and alternative communication options. Think that the child has a hearing problem, then learning sign language or reading the mouth would be an alternative communication way. And developing communication abilities. If the disorder is communication disorder stems from a speech problem, then you should consult to a speech therapist. And thirdly, practicing their communication skills and coping strategies. So here, of course, both the parents, teachers, and the professionals should be involved in it. And the child should be informed about what he or she is suffering from in order to take the child as an ally to your side. So in order to be able to work with the child together, okay? The child should work on him or herself, especially mental retardation doesn't accompany the situation, okay? And I mentioned about speech therapy, but also behavior therapy and environmental modifications are good techniques to use with these children. I mentioned about speech therapy. There are some techniques and you should get expertise in this field. We as psychological counselors or psychologists, we cannot do it if we didn't take any extra training on these. And you already know about behavior therapy. For behavior therapy, the child and the parents are fostered to practice the speech, the articulation problem, or eye contact. And as a result, I had given this example while talking about autistic spectrum disorder. For example, the child gets a raisin, okay? Oops, gets a raisin. So it's the basis of behavior therapy. And environmental modification is important in order to foster the communication. For example, if the child has some hearing loss, you got it. Maybe you will use sign language, or you will use an apparatus to foster the hearing part, and maybe there will not be very loud sounds in order to be able to communicate with each other, not to get some interruptions from outer world. So there may be some environmental modifications for these cases. Thank you. That's all right for now. And if you have any questions, suggestions, any comments, please write them under the video, under the comments part. Okay, see you.